because it is hot. But great that you turned out. I'm Bobby Fitch-Howman, and I'm master of the Boardwalk Grange 151 here in Guilford. And even though the building we live in, so to speak, the Boardwalk Community Center is under construction, we have the blessing of being able to use this space, but this is being sponsored by the Grange. We're excited that all of you are turning out. If you're like me, you probably have a lot of questions. This is a very complex issue, though maybe not for those who've already decided. But we look forward to hearing this discussion tonight. Rick Seymour will actually moderate, and he will instruct you and introduce the folks who are speaking and tell you the procedure. And I just wanted to remind you that, or if you hadn't noticed when you came in, there are refreshments. Please feel free to get up anytime and eat as much as you want. There's cookies and watermelon and drinks and other, I don't know, brownies or something. There's plenty. So enjoy, and I look forward with you folks to learning and hearing. Thank you.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. I'm Rick Seymour. I'm your moderator tonight. I'm a proud member of the Grange, and welcome you. There are handouts at the back table about Act 46, informative handouts. I'll introduce the people up here in a minute. I just want to say that we're nearing the end of the Act 46 process, with the State Board of Education as the final arbiter of governance structures for SUs around the state. It's been a long process, and still being adjudicated are governance structures for SUs which have either voted against merging or have not voted. And they're now in a process. The State Board of Education is in a process of holding 3 hearings, 2 of which have already occurred in the northern, central, and southern parts of the state to get input from school boards and from members of the public. It's unclear at this point what their recommendation will be regarding the WSESU. The meeting this evening is designed to let us discuss the pros and cons of consolidation for Guilford. We are one of the towns in WSESU which the school board is supporting consolidation, and the voters have rejected it. The State Board of Education will take final input from school boards and the public in the southern part of the state in a forum in Chester on September 19th. Each of the school boards in the WSESU has been invited to give a brief presentation and then to answer questions from the State Board of Education. Members of the public will also be given a chance to speak a couple of times during the meeting. And the Board of Education will release its final recommendations in November. The format this evening is as follows. Can you all hear me in the back? Okay.
Speak up a little bit.
A little bit? Okay. I'm almost at top volume, but I'll do my best. First we'll hear from our Senator Becca Balint about the legislative origins and purpose of Act 46. She will be followed by 6-minute presentations from the school board, and Beth and Emily, and from Don McLean, who will be presenting an alternative to consolidation. They may call on some experts in the audience to provide additional information. I think Superintendent Lyle is here, and Frank Ruckert, and also Christina Naylor is here from Dummerston. The school board members and Don will answer questions that you write down. You all have cards and pencils, and if you have a question, please write it down using your very best handwriting, and give it to Bobby to Nancy or Sarah, who will be collecting them and bringing them up to me, and I'll read the questions, and and they can be addressed to either the school board or to Don, or to both. And so that's the format. I think that's it. Did I miss anything? No? Okay, then we'll start with Becca.
All right, well, thank you very much.
and I really want to appreciate Sarah for helping to pull this together. It's been really a pleasure to work with her already, so I'm hoping I'll get a chance to work with her even more. For those of you who don't know me or haven't met me, I'm Becca Balint. I'm one of 2 state senators from Windham County. I've served for 2 terms in the legislature. I live in Brattleboro with my spouse and 2 young children who attend Green Street School. Before I was a legislator, I was a teacher, and I taught in several schools in Windham County, including Guilford Central School. And my favorite age to teach was middle school. My favorite subjects were social studies and history, and some of my best years of teaching were on the middle school team in Guilford. It was really a wonderful experience for me, not just because of the colleagues, but the school community as a whole and the students that I had. I was then, and I still am, fiercely protective of public schools. And I want every student in this county to have excellent opportunities in their public schools. And I will do my best, if I am reelected, to continue to push for well-funded public schools, for our citizenry, for our communities, but of course, most importantly, for our students. Now, in the wake of the AOE Secretary's plan that was released earlier this year related to Act 46, I had many conversations with Guilford residents. Some who supported Act 46 and the merger plan, and many who did not. What was clear to me in all of these conversations to a person was that each wanted to do the best for the students in the community and to keep the school open. That was true for people on both sides of the conversation. The goal is to keep the school open. For some, they viewed Act 46 and the merger plan as the pathway that would enable the school to stay open in the face of declining enrollment. For others, they believed Act 46 would be the death knell for the school. And both those feelings are palpable when you talk to people. All the residents care deeply about their community and its children, and we simply don't agree on what the right path is for the journey forward. My charge from Sarah Coffey tonight was to give you some context and framework for understanding Act 46 and where we are now. I was not on the Education Committee in the Senate when the bill that became Act 46 was written, but I certainly understood the context and the landscape from having been a teacher in 3 different small schools in Windham County. We have acute demographic challenges in Vermont, most especially in Windham County. We have significant declining enrollment statewide in our K-12 system, which is an existential threat to some of our small schools. Our schools are wrestling with adverse effects of both poverty and a terrible opioid epidemic. Schools are needing to provide all kinds of wraparound services for students and families just to get through each day. So in the midst of these very real struggles, we're keenly aware of also the disparate educational opportunities that are available to students. So we know that many students in the state do not have the same opportunities as students who are just in the next town over, or in the northern part of the county versus the southern part of the county. So many of us who supported Act 46 goals believed that encouraging districts to reimagine their structures might actually provide greater opportunities for those students whose programs had been impoverished over the years due to financial constraints. And as someone who taught in the school and has watched the programs shrink at Guilford and the offerings shrink, that is a real concern of me, of mine as an educator and as a mom who truly believes in public schooling. So again, the issue is we all want a robust public school, and it's very difficult to parse out what the right path is. But those of us, and I speak for Jeanette White, I actually met with her this morning, your other state senator. We met this morning about this meeting. I wanted to make sure I could speak for both of us, so you can assume that the words that I am saying here, we have worked on together. This is what we both believe to be true. When Act 46 was written in the Senate and House Education Committees, those of us who did not serve on the Education Committee had to rely heavily on our colleagues to interpret some of the most salient aspects of the proposed legislation so we could fully understand the true intent of the bills. And we sought information specifically related to sections 5 and 9. So for those of you who aren't really familiar with the law, those are the parts of the bill that really deal with what we call the off-ramps. okay, that we were reassured on numerous occasions that alternative governance structures would be a viable option for schools and as an alternative to a direct SU merger. And just as long as the SU could meet the goals of Act 46 with its new alternative governance structure. Our member towns in our SU had votes to determine if they supported the Act 46 merger proposal developed by the study group. And I want to thank everyone who might be in this room who served on the study group. I know that it's a lot of hard work. I was talking to the school board members earlier. It's very, very difficult work that the people did on the study committee and the folks who continue to serve on your school board. So the AOE, so let's get back to the votes. Although 2 school boards supported the merger plan, the majority of voters in Guilford, Dummerston, Putney, and Brattleboro rejected the merger plan. Okay, so you've got 2 school boards voting in support, majority of the populations of those towns voting against, at least for the people who showed up to vote, okay? The statewide plan released by the AOE doesn't reflect the sentiment of the majority of voters who turned out for the Act 46 merger vote. The AOE secretary recommended a full merger of the SU's governance structure and didn't support the alternative governance structure proposal put forth by a local citizens group, some of whom are in this room, many of whom are your friends and neighbors. They supported the position of the 2 school boards who voted to merge. And so just to be clear, because someone was asking me about this earlier, the AGS structure that you will hear more about today was itself never voted on in towns. So, because somebody said, did I miss a vote? Did we see that plan? You never saw that plan. The vote that happened was about the proposed merger and not about AGS. As Rick said, on September 19th, the State Board of Education is going to take testimony at the public hearing in Chester about the statewide plan. This will be an opportunity for residents to once again make the pitch for an alternative governance structure or to support the merger proposal as put forth by your school board. I personally, and on behalf of Senator White as well, I will make a plea to the State Board of Education to thoughtfully and seriously consider the AGS plan in light of the lopsided votes of my constituents. And I'm not endorsing the plan. I want to be really clear because we have different public roles and these are your local public officials on the school board. And I am in no means trying to undermine their work. I'm simply saying from where I sit as a senator, I want to be clear to the board that I want them to listen carefully to the constituents on the ground, okay? They're going to give you the details of how they came to their decision. And again, I'm not endorsing the AGS structure. You guys, that's for you to decide. That's not for me to decide for you, okay? You're going to hear the plan and decide. But I will be asking them to seriously consider it, which I know many people in the room feel like it hasn't been seriously considered, okay? And that is the sentiment. I just want to bring that into the room. I'm here tonight as a legislator, but I'm also here as a former teacher in this school and as a mom who has kids in public schools in Brattleboro who worries deeply about the long-term health of our public schools. And I'm here to answer questions if I can, but mostly I'm here to listen deeply to the concerns that residents have here in Guilford and to hear how you as a community are going to move forward. So, and I'm now going to turn it over to your school board members, past and present.
Thank you, Becca. Set my timer. Thank you to the Grange for hosting. Can you hear me in the back?
No. Maybe standing up would help.
Is that better? Can you hear me? Okay. Let me know if I need to be louder. I'm Emily Hartz. I'm the current chair of the Guilford School Board. Thank you to the panel members, for people hosting, for people cooking, and for all of you here tonight. We have former Guilford School Board members and current Guilford School members. Could you raise your hands? There they are. Lots of them in the room. And we have the Guilford School Principal. Thanks, John, for being here. And it's a little terrifying to be here, and it's also really exciting to be talking about the future of our school and for our children. I think we have a really vibrant and exciting time ahead of us, and this gathering is evidence of that. We're here together to move forward. I'm going to turn it over to Beth so that she can talk about the previous board's process up until December 20th when we sent a letter to the Agency of Ed, and then I'll take over again to talk about what's really exciting happening now in Wyndham Southeast and in Guilford School. And just to say also, I also taught at Guilford School. I taught 5th grade for 3 years, and that was my best teaching time, and it's a place that's very dear to me.
All
Are you
right.
okay?
So I tend to be a loud talker, so I don't think I'll have to stand up, but if you can't hear me, just raise your hand and I'll go even louder. I wish I had as eloquently prepared comments as Becca did, but I'm going to just wing it. So I first wanted to outline the timeline that the school board went through from when we were first introduced to the Act 46 process to when we ultimately sent the letter supporting the Articles of Agreement drafted by the study committee in December of 2017. So the process began in 2015, and the study committee was formed in November. And prior to the study committee forming, interestingly enough, I believe the entire Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union had sent a letter of opposition to the state in regards to Act 46, urging them not to do something like that. And I think that's important in the context of this process to understand that the board in its entirety at one point in time was very cynical about the process. And it really took the full 3-year progression and the full hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating, of meetings about this issue for us to kind of transition into the opinion that was presented in the letter to the state board. And so, once those study committee meetings started, we talked about a whole range of things, and that's when the board's wheels started turning and started to realize the benefits that this could have on our school and our community. At the time, as we have for many years during budget season, we're faced with decisions, and those decisions are becoming harder and harder as our tuition goes down and our expenses go up. And as we learned about the financial implications of the merger, we saw it really as an opportunity for Guilford to be able to become more sustainable and long-lasting, given the student count and how that impacts your tax rate and your cost per student. Additionally, we were able to share with the other towns in the supervisory union what programming opportunities each of the schools had. And it was really eye-opening to realize the amount of inequity that exists in our supervisory union. You would think, being a supervisory union, that we'd be pretty much the same, when in fact it's quite different between the schools. And so as we started hearing what other schools had, again, we're like, well, that would be really great to have in Guilford, and what could we do to be able to implement programs like that in our school? And so the realization of the inequities and the excitement over the increased opportunities, along with the financial situation that was becoming more challenging and the possibility of that financial burden being eased by a merging situation, really started to shape the school board's opinion in favor of the Articles of Agreement. Notable points that I wanted to make. At the very beginning, as we entered into this process, the board was very much aware of the implication of this decision and this process. We knew we were facing the biggest change in public education in 100 years or more, and took it extremely seriously. Never once underestimating the impact of the work that we were doing. At our study committee meetings, Guilford was by far the most represented board at those meetings. While I was the study committee representative, at most of our meetings, the majority of our board came in attendance. And that can't be said for any other town in our district. And I think it speaks volumes to our board, how invested they were, but also our community and how invested we are in keeping our school open. Our principal was there at the majority of the meetings. can't say that for most of the other schools. It was profound to see the engagement from our community. The other things that I wanted to say is that when we were evaluating the various alternatives, and not just the AGS proposal, which you'll hear about, but the other options that fell within the Act 46 merger, there were all sorts of different paths that we could go down. And we had to find which path fit our situation the best. And what we ultimately used as our determining criteria for whether it was the right path or not came down to three primary things: student opportunity, financial sustainability, and meeting the requirements of the law. And so we can go into more detail as the night goes on about how we use those to evaluate, but I think it's important to know that those were the criteria that we used, and when we came across a path that we thought was not the best path in one of those three criteria, that's how it would have taken the side to another option that perhaps was better in those three areas. So I think that's all I had to say. How am I on time? I went over.
I think we're okay.
You're running over a bit, but go ahead. You have some brief comments?
I would love to.
Sure.
Thanks, Rick. And you all have a handout from us summarizing that process. And we included the letter that we sent to the Agency of Education that also outlined our process and our opinion. When I talked to the superintendent and the principal about the school and the SU and what's exciting that's happening now and what we could look forward to, I'm just going to share with you the list. In a merged district, we could realize expanded pre-K programming, ease of student transfer, more opportunities for our continued and expanded opportunities for our middle schoolers, expanded after-school offerings, and then possibly the opportunity to share staff as population fluctuates in towns. Specifically in Guilford School, we have really amazing things happening with our Farm to School program and place-based education. We've spent a year now with a pre-K program that's very vibrant, and we have a full wait list for the following year and some people on the wait list for the following year. And the school just was also awarded a $22,000 federal grant for professional development for place-based proficiency learning. And we're really proud of that work, and we think that work will be only exponentially better in a merged district situation. The school teachers have been working all summer getting ready, and I was there today, and it's a really, really amazing place, and we think will only be more amazing with the shared opportunity and resources of a merged district. So thank you all for listening and for being here, and we're here to answer questions.
Thank you both very much. Don, yes? Sure. Okay.
I'm also a past chair of the Guilford School Board. Last November, after Vernon had already voted to drop out of the Act 46 process, the other four towns in our supervisory union were asked to vote on whether to adopt the merger articles submitted by the Act 46 Study Committee. All four towns' voters rejected the merger district-wide by 71% opposed to 29% in favor, with Guilford at 62% opposed. Many voters assumed this overwhelming result would scuttle the move to a merger. Nothing on the ballot said advisory only, but in fact the law only said that for a merger to go forward, a vote had to be taken. The result didn't matter. This revelation seemed contrary to our democratic process. So although some school boards, including Guilford's, stayed with the merger proposal, some residents of other towns were pursuing an alternative path. I often hear people say, well, Act 46 is the law, meaning merger is inevitable. But look at this from the Vermont Agency of Education. Act 46, Section 9, proposals. The legislature required the board of each school district in the state that will not be in a newly unified structure by July 1, 2019 to submit a Section 9 proposal by December 26, 2017, in which the school board analyzes the district's current ability to meet the Act 46 goals, recounts conversations with other districts on ways to improve opportunity, equity, and efficiency regionally, and presents a proposal to improve by either merging with other districts, working with other districts in some other way, or retaining the same governance structure. Turned out people in other towns had been working on just such an alternative plan. Dummerston School Board had created an alternative governance structure, AGS, subcommittee back in May 2017, and by November, it was joined by the full Vernon School Board and subcommittee members from Brattleboro and briefly Guilford, which then dropped out again. A few of us from Guilford, thinking our town ought to be involved, have been attending these meetings and local and statewide forums and workshops, joining AGS members at the Agency of Education and State Board of Education sessions. The main reason residents of the towns are opposed to the merger is it will eliminate town school districts and boards, including your Guilford School Board. These boards, like our select and other boards, are basic to our Vermont system. When we lose these local, essentially volunteer citizen bodies, we lose transparency, immediacy, and accountability. Small towns will surrender their governance to a unified district board, a single board for the 4-town unit. The Articles of Merger from the WSESU Study Committee propose a 9-member board with only 1 representative each guaranteed for Dummerston, Putney, and Guilford. 2 proposed at-large seats might be occupied by reps from the small town. Guilford might get a second rep that way or not. In late August, the Agency of Education issued a new set of draft articles that give a default guideline for districts that are required to merge, but it is still unknown what the Board of Ed will actually mandate in its ruling this fall. A small town, ours, loses the political leverage to keep its school from closing at some point, maybe in 5 years, maybe even never. The new agency default articles just issued contain a provision that no school will be closed during the first 2 years. Hardly reassuring. Keep in mind the buzzword that has accompanied the Act 46 process: consolidation. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary definition of consolidation: the process of uniting, the unification of 2 or more corporations by dissolution of existing ones and creation of a single new corporation. The AGS proposal submitted to the State Agency of Ed last December is based upon our already effective WSESU, keeping the current governance structure, enriching it through collaboration, which is outlined on the AGS handout, which is on the table there. It retains local school boards and districts, provides for increased collaboration and equity between schools through leadership councils and an opportunity and equity committee, adds such mechanisms as a supervisory union level agency fund, carousel district meetings, and limited school transfer for students who need to transfer to another school. And now, a big reason why the AGS is so much better for our district, and that reason is Vernon. Vernon has left the BUHS district and will not be part of an Act 46 imposed merger. In a merger, the state will not ultimately allow Vernon to remain a free agent. They will be required to unify with something. Current discussion is they might be joined with the former Wyndham Central SU. You know, Newfane, Townsend, and Vernon. Is there an alternative to that? Yes, it's called the Alternative Governance Structure, which Vernon has indicated it would join if we convince the State Board of Ed to adopt it. Vernon is our neighbor with whom we share a legislative district, and much more. Guilford citizens have the right to testify to the State Board on September 19th in Chester. Carpools are available. Thank you.
Thank you all. Questions? Write them down, send them up. Our runners are waiting.
No, but I heard we're early.
People need more cars.
Maybe they're satisfied.
Great presentations, people.
Yeah,
No question. My first one is for Don. Where would you propose to find funding for middle school for Guilford under the AGS?
Okay. That's interesting.
Would it be helpful if we gave some context to that?
Yeah,
Sure.
because we're in this funny netherworld right now, and I think people mostly know that Guilford is not currently completely part of the UHS number 6 district, the way the other towns are, and we're under a kind of a tuition plan, which our rep, Sean Murphy, worked very hard on, and at some point, presumably, that relationship will have to change into a more conventional one, in which case, I don't think there's any reason why that would be any different than anything else.
Yeah. So the BUHS, or the BAMS agreement, is one of the big pillars of support, I guess, for the Act 46 merger articles as proposed from the school board. So if any of you have attended recent school board meetings in the last couple years, you've heard us talking about a transitional period that we're in becoming members of Brattleboro District 6. So in 2013, I believe, the town voted to send our middle school students to BAMS. There was a stepped tuition agreement that was made that would slowly get the Guilford payments up to the full tuition rate so that we could adjust over a period of time. That period of time has expired. It actually expired 2 years ago. So we have been offered an extension from BUHS District 6, thanks to a lot of hard work from Sean, to bridge the gap to this Act 46 decision. If the Act 46 merger proposal, as any merger proposal, doesn't transpire, then in our next budget season, this coming fiscal year, we will incorporate a full tuition rate for our BUH, or our BAMS students, which will be a significant increase in our budget. I want to say to the tune of $75,000 to $100,000, but I'm a little bit rusty on my numbers. But anyway, that is just a straight increase to the budget. So as you can imagine, our budgets are all based on, our tax rate is based on a budget and the number of students that we have to equate to a cost per student. And that's how our tax rates are calculated. If our student numbers continue to go down or stay the same or stay within the same, and we add $75,000, $100,000 to our budget, our cost per student will obviously increase significantly, thus resulting in an increased tax rate. It would be significant. It's been a concern of the boards for the last couple of years. We've been very thankful that we've been given this additional time period to bridge us to Act 46. But it would be a really big challenge for the school board this year if faced with that full dollar amount.
Okay.
Did Don want to answer that question?
Did you want to answer that?
No, I think that was very clear. I think at some point, it's obvious that at some point, if things keep going, Guilford simply is going to have to join that district, and why wouldn't they? I think initially there was this kind of idea that maybe it wouldn't work and that Guilford would take those students back. I think that was kind of parenthetical originally, but that seems pretty unrealistic.
Is it okay if I comment additionally? So correct me if I'm wrong, but if we join District 6, then we can no longer count our middle school students in our head count. So right now they're helping us reduce our cost per student. So if we join District 6, there's no longer a tuition, but we also no longer can count those students. And the rate that we would be paying full tuition is still less than what it would cost us to provide those same services here in Guilford. So it wouldn't benefit us, in my opinion, to join the district. So the catch, that's the problem that we're seeing, is we want to continue to have our students go to BAMS and get the opportunities that they're getting, but we're going to have to pay for it now. So we either bump up our tax rate quite a bit, or this merged scenario would alleviate that entirely, because we would all be one. There would be no tuitioning our students to BAMS. Our cost per student, then of course all of our money is one, and our students are all one big number. And the article proposal indicated that the cost per student would stay around what it is in Guilford right now, symbolizing a similar tax rate that we're experiencing now. Whereas if we recognize the full increase of the BAMS tuition, our tax rate will certainly go up.
Can I just clarify, cost per student will be the same
Can you
in
speak
all
up?
the towns in the district?
Or can you repeat the question?
Sure. The question was, under a merged scenario, would the cost per student be the same in all districts? And the answer is yes. We would be one district, so all of our costs go together and all of our students go together to make that division and one cost per student.
Okay, a question for the school board. Given the town vote against merging, will the Guilford School Board support a forced merger if that is what the State Board of Education recommends? And if so, why?
I'm not exactly sure what the question is. What I'm hearing is, how will we respond to the state if the state requires a merger of districts? And I think I speak for the board, and what's been true in our conversations is that we'll continue to support our school and our students, and we'll do what we need to do to meet the law and the requirements of the Board of Education. It won't be up to us at that point. I think our response will be, we'll have to evolve based on what they're requiring of us. I guess it's hard for me to predict on behalf of the board. I think we all want the school to stay open and to thrive, and so we'll try to meet those requirements creatively. I'm remembering something that I didn't say before that I want to add to the list of exciting things. If this has been happening in the last couple of months, we are in conversation with the Community Collaborative for Guilford to possibly lease or sell land to develop an early childhood center near the school. And so I guess my response to that question is, we'll keep doing what we're doing, and we'll keep working with the people in our town to be creating exciting opportunities for our families.
Can I add, and maybe I'm interpreting the question a little differently, or maybe not, but I'm hearing the question being, how can the school board support the articles if the town did not? I'm not sure if that was the intent of the question, but I will answer that in case. So I can speak for myself, and I can also say that for the majority of the deliberation period for this Act 46, the majority of the time, the entire board was in consensus over what we were doing. And so I think that speaks volumes to the dedication that we have to learning as much as we can about the process and the impact that it would have in Guilford. But so personally, I spoke before about my evolution from being kind of cynical about it to ultimately supporting it. And I think we were elected by you all to become the experts for the decisions that need to be made for our school. And that's a responsibility that I took extremely seriously, and spent many, many hours becoming the expert on Act 46. And I completely recognize and appreciate the townwide vote. I think it was super important, and we took that into consideration, but I could not have slept at night voting for something that, or not voting for something that I thought was the best to keep our school open. So we explored other alternative options, considered it wholeheartedly, and didn't feel like it met the needs of our students and our communities as well as these articles. And I had to vote what I felt was the best. And I'm sure that's what the other board members did. And our administration and the majority of our staff and a large population of the parents and the stakeholders who have the most at stake in this decision were very supportive of us for the most part. And so it was a vote from the heart, and that's all I can say to that.
Can I add something?
Sure.
I want to state the obvious that the board, if the school board, if the Board of Education dictates that the districts merge, would dissolve June 1st. No.
July 1st.
July 1st, thank you.
Fiscal year.
Yes, and so the titles would change. Two of us, if the Board of Ed goes for the default merger articles, would be on the merged district board, or one of us, and possibly a member at large, would be on the newly formed merged district board. And we would continue to do the work that I described. And the town would have a new body, probably made of some of the same people, as a school leadership district liaison. And so our titles would change, I want to add. But I think that the people would continue to be involved to carry on this work.
Okay, next question for Don. How would the AGS provide equalized opportunity to all WSESU students?
Among the provisions of, and an important thing to realize is that this is a working document. This isn't necessarily what's going to happen, but it's good suggestions. To answer that very important question, which is critical to meeting the goals of 46, the AGS proposes an Opportunity and Equity Committee. Actually, it begins with the idea of a Community Leadership Council, which would be comprised of at least one school board member, a teacher, a parent, an administrator, and interested citizen and student representatives where deemed appropriate from that district to discuss and work towards an understanding of needs and strengths of each school. And this body would have a bit more clout than the Leadership Council suggested in the merger proposal. Feeding out of that is this Opportunity and Equity Committee, which is a core tenet of the AGS, which proposes that school board members who serve on community leadership councils will meet as representatives on the Opportunity and Equity Committee, an official committee that will meet regularly to investigate, propose, and recommend equity and efficiency initiatives throughout the union. And it's recommended that this committee also participate at full board so-called carousel meetings to update the SU board members on the union's compliance with Act 46 goals and to set collective goals for efficiency and equity. Carousel meetings would consist of a gathering of all board members of all the districts to provide information and recommend goals, followed by breakout group meetings by districts for discussion of implementation details. This practice is intended to encourage collaboration as well as greatly reduce the number of meetings SU staff must attend throughout the year. So it's a very important part of the AGS. The idea is that although there are the separate districts and separate boards, that a very particular effort will be made to provide equity, to find out what's going on in the different schools, bring things back to schools, send things to other schools. And I can talk a bit more about that if needed. We will also perhaps get into the Regional Education Assistance Fund, which is another part of the AGS, which would offer the possibility of a pool of funds to take on projects for particular districts that those districts couldn't afford. And we'll talk about that if we need to. So the idea is to keep the local governance, which, as I said, is absolutely the key reason why I became involved in this, and what I think is at the core of this is to keep our local school boards, which I find extremely valuable and important to our Vermont way of governance, and yet to do a lot more sharing. I would also say that since the WSESU is essentially the model we're talking about under AGS, the existing WSESU, I think the I should stop saying all those letters, the SU is, and I know from my own time on the school board and working on a lot of SU committees, I think it's a very good, a very strong, and a growingly strong entity. We already have a unified district. It's called the WSESU. We're not really off by ourselves somewhere in the woods. We are very much in Guilford a part of Dummerston, Putney, Brattleboro, and sometimes Vernon. And so it's using what exists, which is such a strong model, and improving it in a number of ways. How's that?
Okay.
You want them to? Oh, you got a lot.
Please ask if the people in the back can hear.
I can.
We can turn off the fan if needed.
Oh, don't do that.
How many want to turn off the fan?
How about
Okay.
you speak up? We
We'll
need
be
to
loud.
Yeah.
Speak up.
Fan stays on, we speak up. This is for the school board. What are the demographic, or Don, what are the demographic trends in Guilford in terms of class sizes?
Could we ask John, could John speak to that, our
Sure.
principal? Would you like to?
Sure. I'd love to. Hi, I'm John Gagnon. I'm the principal at Guilford School, and thank you for coming tonight. It just shows everybody is very dedicated to the school. So this current year, our population, which is pre-K through grade 6, is at 118 students, which is, for us, that's a bit of growth. And I tie that to two recent developments. One is the establishment of a pre-K program, which is a fabulous program, and it's brought in 15 new students into our head count. And the second piece is that we've been fortunate in that there has been some influx of people into our school this year, people moving in from out of state, folks coming in, working at the hospital or working at the decommissioning the nuke plant. And we were able to, I am not a car salesman. I never wanted to be a salesman, but I am becoming a pretty good salesman because I've made calls, I've made cold calls, I have given out my cell phone number, I've talked with people at all times of the day and night, and I have sold them on what a great town Guilford is, and what great programs and what great energy we have in this town. We have a nature-based pre-K. We're doing a lot of work on place-based education. Beth and Emily mentioned proficiency-based learning, which again is the next iteration of the Common Core standards and how to get our kids ready for the world that they will be stepping into in a very short amount of time. We're doing a lot of work to make Guilford Central School on the cutting edge of what's happening in the state of Vermont, blending progressive education with really high-quality academics. So we've brought in people. I do want to state that when I started working at Guilford School and I started teaching some of your children, the student population was at 299 kids. 299 kids.
What year?
299 kids back in the mid-90s.
1993, around October, November.
Yep, and it stayed through that, in that area, through the late 90s. And then when I became principal in 2002, we were at 289 kids. And tonight, we're at 118. And we have been as low as 99 children in the school. Part of the reason why the town, in my mind, part of the reason the town voted to have our children go to bands is because at that point we were looking at a 7th grade of 12 children and an 8th grade of 14 kids. I've taught kindergartners through college seniors. My favorite group of kids, people to teach are 12 to 14-year-olds. And that's probably because I am very immature. And I love that grade. I love that age. So, and I was a middle school teacher at Guilford. And it hurt me to think of that. My kids were headed off down to bands. But it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. And that's because our population declined to such a degree, and those middle schoolers needed to be with other middle schoolers. That's so important for them at that age. So tonight we're at 118. Our enrollment has declined significantly. That ties into what Beth was speaking about in terms of how much revenue we get from the state, and it affects you in terms of your tax rate. I'll just say, you didn't ask, but I'm going to tell you. I'm very proud of the former board. I'm proud that most of the former board is here this evening. They spent countless hours on this through the AGS 46 Study Committee. I'm very proud of the current board who is here tonight and feeling the heat from you about why are they standing with the Act 46 merger proposal. It's because these people believe this is the best way to keep this school open and alive and vibrant. I shared Beth's cynicism fully when this law became enacted. I didn't think it was a good law, frankly. But over the process of being involved as a spectator and working with the board through the Act 46 study process, I've come to believe completely that it's our best opportunity to keep Guilford Central School alive and vibrant. And it's directly tied to our enrollment and our demographics and what's happening all over the state of Vermont, as Becca alluded to right at the beginning of this evening. So I'm long-winded. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, John. Question for Emily and Beth. If the state school board decides to close Guilford Central School, what happens to the school buildings, grounds, and other assets?
So the articles that were supported by the board said that school buildings would be sold back to the community for $1. So essentially it would come back to the town of Guilford to use however we wanted to. And our students would obviously be dispersed in any remaining open schools in our district.
Okay.
Good night.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sure, and then Don. Sure,
Just
go
to
ahead,
say
Emily.
that wouldn't happen, as far as we know, the draft, let's see, the Board of Education posted default articles of merger. We don't know what they'll decide, but based on the default articles and what we've understood from the Agency of Education, no schools would close within the first 2 years.
Can I
And
pipe in
then,
a little bit?
sure, go ahead.
I think it was the AOE that issued the default.
Speak up.
I believe it was the Agency of Education that issued the default articles a couple weeks ago, and those are going to be taken up by the State Board of Ed. So I think one thing we have to keep in mind is we really don't know what's going to come out of that. They may decide merger, something else, but it's not necessarily going to look like any of this stuff. There may be significant differences or there may be small differences. I wanted to say about the school closing. This is a big issue. It's what people are talking about a lot in this situation. And it's a concern because, once again, the big concern that some of us have is the political governance setup. If we end up with a unified board, Guilford is at the mercy of other towns and of the unified district. They may be very nice to Guilford, or they may say, wait a minute, this school is over here, it's costing a lot of money, and we can take it out of the system. That said, I think we have a lot of good optimism here. I'm not part of the scare tactic that unless this happens, the Guilford School is going to close. I think we have a lot going for us, what John and the board members have just been saying. It's more the concern with the political governance situation that we would lose our leverage to keep it open if it comes to that. 2 years is kind of a scary short amount of time. It probably won't be 2 years anyway. But I'm pleased to note that SBAC results, and I had to look this up because in my day it was NECAP, which means Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. But our SBAC results are way up in the last couple of years. Our math scores the last time around, I think, were the highest in the SU. Is that right, John? And yeah, and that's great because we were down. Also on the enrollment, the BAMS, the kids going to BAMS did affect our building population. I mean, they're still in our count in terms of funding, but that is a statistical part of that really sharp dip that you see about 5 years ago. So it's actually quite optimistic that despite those kids leaving the building, that we have regained the population we have. And thank you to Beth and her school board for the pre-K, which I think was the greatest thing since Wonder Bread, honestly. First of all, it's a great program. We have great teachers. And I talk to parents who just love it. And of course, the real important thing to those of us who look at the big picture is that it's getting kids into the building while they're still younger. Presumably we'll get them into kindergarten, first grade. It's going to build our population. It just has to, especially with waiting lists for 2 years. It's fantastic. So I think that's really good news. I also believe there was some talk of the small school grants possibly going missing, but latest that we're hearing is that we're still going to get the small school grant, I think. Do we know that? We don't. Okay. But I do think there's a lot of good stuff going on, and so that's actually important. I don't like the idea of this being gloomy business, but I do want to protect the structure that keeps it our town school. And I think we've all heard this argument a lot, but the school is the heart of the community. It's not just a filling station where kids go to get an education and then get sent away all chock full of knowledge. It's an integral part of the society in a small town. And I get annoyed when people say, I don't come to that part of town meeting because I don't have kids in the school. It's completely irrelevant. The school is part of the life of everybody who lives in a town like this. And there's nothing else that takes its place. And there's nothing else that can take its place should we happen to lose it. And that really is at the heart of the reason why I'm involved with this. Thank you.
All right, following up on that, town meeting, this is for anyone. Please comment on how the four-town school merger will affect town meeting in Guilford. Will citizens have a similar role in discussing and overseeing education of Guilford's children?
Yeah, I can speak to what the study committee discussed. So there would no longer be a portion of town meeting where you would vote for the Guilford's town school budget. But what we were envisioning in our discussions, which again is not dictated yet by the state whether this vision of ours would come true or not, but what we were envisioning and is in our draft articles would be that we would hold a pre-town meeting similar to how we do now, where we would have the same type of conversations that we do at town meetings, sharing what's going on with the school board. The actual vote on the dollar amount that's going, towards public education funding would happen similar to how it does at the high school right now, where it would be Australian ballot, and that would be uniform around the entire merged district. So you'd vote Australian ballot on the budget portion.
Comment?
Thank you for leading into my next argument, which is that, yes, in fact, the citizens' participation in that governance process in a unified district will be very similar to the participation currently in the BUHS District 6 model. And in fact, a convenient thing for us is that we have District 6 to look at to see how that would work. And how it works is that there's a lot of distance between parents and citizens and others and the school district, partly the fault of those citizens who are not participating. Sean Murphy does his job. He goes to the meetings, the school board, they hold this big meeting in the gym, and last time, I think I was one of 8 Guilford citizens. That was kind of a low count. Usually we manage 12 or 16 of us. Below 1% of the entire population, voting population checklist of those towns shows up to vote. It's truly, it's not kind of as folksy as town meeting. It's a February night. Nobody knows. We tried Saturday mornings, even fewer people came. But there really is a distancing between the voters and the budget. And it's, of course, a much larger budget that's voted at the high school level than at any of the town levels. And so it's weird because it's disproportional. The more the money, the less people care. It's kind of strange. But and who goes to BUHS board meetings? Parents tend to go to their local school board meetings if they have a complaint about math or the school bus or something. That doesn't tend to happen much at the high school level. So once again, it's this governance piece. It's the whole business about the transparency, the immediacy, the accountability that we lose. And as you all know, I've been opposed both times it came up in Guilford to the Australian ballot method of voting a school budget. I think it's a really kind of wimpy way to do it. I tend to like, and I think maybe a lot of you do too, the give and take that we have when we do a floor vote on our budget. When somebody can stand up and say, I move we take 50 cents out of the budget. We spent half an hour voting on that amendment, and we do or don't take it out. And there has been flexibility that way. There's also accountability that way. Somebody can stand up and say to the school board, why is this? At an Australian ballot, yes, you can go to a pre-meeting at some point, but that, once again, that immediacy is lost. The nice thing about town meeting and about this local government is that it's right there in front of us. And I find that really valuable. It's one of the things I really like about living in a small town. It's being part of that, and it's part of me. And the Australian ballot, it's yes or no. $27 million budget, boop, boop. Whoops, I didn't mean to vote that way, goodbye. So that's going to happen also if we have a unified district-wide situation. Maybe it doesn't matter. That's up to you guys to tell me whether that matters, but to me it matters.
Do you mind if I help? Yeah, I don't disagree. I think nobody would want to change the local town meeting organization that we have here. So I don't think anybody would stand up and say, oh, we'd like to get rid of that. But again, this whole entire decision comes down to weighing what we have in front of us. So we're not going to have everything that we want. We want to keep our school open at a rate that everybody here can afford and providing the services that our kids need and deserve. And if we have to give up that portion of town meeting, I think that's worth it.
Again, there's a question that's kind of a comment. I think I can answer it, saying, John didn't really answer the question about current population trends in the school. And I think John said the school population is up from a low point of 99 to 119 now, and it's up a few over the past year. So it's still low, but it's you know, but, and who can say what the future's gonna be, you know?
I can say, we did lots of graphing and trending through our study committee, and there are spikes. So one of the things that we actually spoke specifically about in our letter was it is the decline, because over a long span of time there's a decline, but it's the volatility that makes it hard for a small school to deal with. And I think this year is a great example. Our kindergarten class last year was, what, John? 9? This year it's 21, I believe. And so they were faced with possibly needing to hire another kindergarten teacher to support this year's class. But then what do you do next year when the class coming in is 9 or 10 again? You're gonna have to fire that teacher. And so it's the volatility in that enrollment and the overall decline that makes it a challenge. And that challenge would be alleviated in a merged district because we could share teachers. So maybe Guilford has a spike in kindergarten this year, and next year Brattleboro has a spike in first grade, and we can nicely move that teacher from one class to another where they're needed. And that's the challenge that we have right now.
Okay, for Emily and Beth, as there are still many unknowns, and the town vote is unknowns, and the school board is the school board willing, when it goes before the Board of Education on September 19th, would the board consider taking a similar position to Senator Balint and ask the Board of Education to consider some elements of the AGS, specifically not losing our local school boards?
It's not appropriate for me to speak for the board. We have addressed that question in the letter that the previous board addressed that question in the letter that was sent to the Agency of Education. We acknowledge that our school board has a different opinion than many of the voters of our town. And I think we would repeat and expand on that if the Board of Education asked us.
And I think, keeping it's all puzzle pieces, right? So if you change one little piece of how the plan works, another piece doesn't fit. So legally, if we kept and retained our own local boards, it by default doesn't make the rest of the plan work. So it would be difficult to say we want to implement, or we still support this plan, but please just allow us to keep our local boards, because it doesn't work that way. So inherently, you can't keep your local board if you're going to merge. So the articles that were drafted specifically addressed the desire to retain some local input by creating the leadership councils that Don mentioned earlier. Again, and nobody's trying to say they hold any great power, but it's an advisory council that would act similarly and have similar discussions to what our local board does now, and be able to provide that input to the greater board. And that was really the best way we could address that concern. Again, if we could keep our local boards and still be viable and sustainable and have all the same programming as everybody else, we wouldn't be in this predicament.
I'm going to ask another question. This is for Don. Actually for anyone. With Vernon out of the BUHS number 6 SU, how much of an increase in tuition will occur? Frank, you want to speak to that?
I think I heard the question, Vernon out of the SU, so that's an incorrect premise. At this point, Vernon is still in the SU. They did vote to leave BUHS Union High School.
Well, that's what the question's about.
Okay, maybe I just didn't hear.
Sorry, the high school.
The high school, yes. Okay, so as we know, Vernon has been sending the vast majority of their students to the high school since the 1950s, maybe before that as well. And as we've heard tonight, So much of school finance is based on a budget divided by kids, which produces a cost per student, and that dynamic probably won't change. So the answer is won't be much different from Vernon's town of point of view. And if I could just bring a couple other comments, John and the board members' comments about why this issue around merging versus an autonomous separate employer, or we call it a district, is so central. We just to connect some dots, John mentioned 300 kids a few years ago. And then it wasn't too long that we had 200 kids at Guilford, and now we have about 100 kids. So in the context of school funding and what it means from the Appropriations Committee and the folks that are concerned about the exodus of Vermonters from the state because of the high cost of school property taxes, it's a pretty straightforward progression in that you at town meeting passed a budget for about $3 million for the Guilford School. If you put that in the historical context and you divide $3 million by 300 kids, that's $10,000 a kid, right? Easy math. The state goes to a table like we all do when we file our federal taxes or our state taxes. It goes to a table and it just says, well, how's Guilford spending compared to $10,000? And in this example, 3 million divided by 300 kids, $10,000. You go to the tax table for the state sets for funding all public schools. You divide those numbers. $10,000 Guilford spends divided by the table of 10,000 is $1. You would pay $1. Any district in the state would pay $1 per $100 of value, or if you have a $100,000 house, that's $1,000. So then, when just connecting the dots here again, John says, well, we went from 300 to 200 students. In the same scenario of a $3 million budget, 3 million divided by 200 students is $15,000 per kid. In that scenario, you go to the tax table of 10,000, you divide 15,000 by 10,000, your tax rate's $1.50, right? 15 divided by 10 is $1.50. And here we are today, same $3 million budget, and that is what you passed. Now we're down to 100 kids. 3 million divided by 100 kids is $30,000, right? We went from 10 to 20, now 30,000. We still go to the tax table. $10,000, 30,000 for Guilford divided by 10,000 is $3, or 3,000 per 100. So that's what the school board has been struggling with. Those are increases, enormous tax increases. You haven't seen those because the school board has been struggling with what programs can we offer, what programs do we have to cut. And this is in the context of you being an autonomous single employer. You have your own tax ID number. You have your own grand list. You have your own separate budget. So when you deal with these major shifts in enrollment, it's either you got to find new revenues or you got to cut expenses or go find new kids. And the school board did a good job, a creative job of essentially creating a new grade, right? Preschool. And that's what brought us up from 100 to 118. So that's mitigating this. But without the merger across the state, this is the plight of the small community. And as Emily has said earlier, and Beth, they recognize that this is what will save Guilford School, because it's no longer here's Guilford's $3 million budget and your 100 kids. It's Guilford's part of a region of a $50 million budget with 3,000 kids, and if 10 kids move out of Guilford, well, it's likely there's going to be an offset in another community, and everybody has the same tax rate. You all have the same cost per student, and that's when we can share programming for, if in Guilford it's pre-K that's needed, there can be an investment there that is not going to spike one community's tax rate. It's going to be the region. Now, if everybody went out and increased their spending by 20%, yes, there's going to be a collective, there's no free lunch on this. But it takes away that erratic change in the affordability of funding public schools in small communities, and that's
Thanks,
the central piece.
I think you've answered the question.
Okay.
Thank you. There's a question for Don. The Guilford School budget is in a dire situation. If a merger does not happen by July 1st, 2019, immediate cuts will need to be made to our budget. What cuts to staff or programming is the AGS planning to propose for Guilford for the next school year?
Well, the AGS isn't proposing any staff cuts. And as to whether it's in dire condition, I guess we can ask the school board about that. There are lots of really good equalizing things built into the AGS. And one of the things I did want to say is that it hasn't really been clear that a merger saves money. And I know that when the whole thing started, that was one of the things that we kept hearing, and then after a while we didn't hear it anymore. And I think it's probably a wash. Let's just assume that. Anything from you guys on that? The question wasn't too
Yeah,
clear.
I don't think that the study committee was envisioning a drastic decrease in tax rates across the board, but we're hoping, like I said, to remove the volatility that happens in a lot of the small communities and to equalize the tax rates across the board.
Were you responding to something, Sean?
Well, we're doing this on purpose, writing questions out, so I'll collect your question.
I thought he was responding to that question.
I was just going to talk briefly about demographics.
I think that makes,
Okay, Sean's going to talk briefly about demographics.
Thank you very much.
Briefly.
So what I did was I looked up my old town reports. I got the 1993, and it had a really nice chart of enrollment. Oh, sorry, Rich. Enrollment and so forth. So I went to 1993, and that was the high. I think my daughter was in school here then. So there were 411 students, counting the high school also. And then I looked at last year's, and in last year's there were 226 counting the high school. So that's a 45% drop in enrollment in Guilford from 1993 to 2017. And I think what Becca referred to in the beginning, this is a statewide issue. And this is one of the big drivers about Act 46. Is it a perfect act? Absolutely not. Does it have a lot of downsides? Absolutely it does. But I think what the legislature was doing is looking at a big problem of demographics. So I think that if people understood that we're losing our young people, we're losing our old people, our state is going down 1,200 individuals every year. So we're also the second oldest state in the country in terms of demographics. And we have the lowest birth rate in the country. So those demographics is like a perfect storm. So I think that it's mindful to look at that. Thank you.
Okay, the next question's a long one, and it was for Becca, and I guess, do you want to read it, or?
yeah, well, first I had two questions. So the first one, well, what was the purpose of the ballot for the merger proposal? And I think what they're saying, I think the question is, legislatively, what were we thinking about in that including in the law? And so I think, like my seatmate, we assumed that holding a ballot measure on the merger vote in each of the towns of an SU, and you didn't have a majority of people who majority of people who supported it, then that merger proposal would not be pushed forward by the AOE. And I see, I mean, that was, so as we've all said in various forms, there are flaws in the law. I will not dispute that. And so clearly, there are things that needed to be tightened up that were not tightened up by our, we don't, it's funny because we don't actually, in committee, write the laws without lawyers there to help us do it, because we are a citizen legislature. We are not professionals, so we count on people to be able to say, this works with that doesn't work with this section contradicts this other section that you wrote earlier. And so I'm going to be very candid with you. So my reading of it, as with Senator White's, was that if you did not have a majority of your towns in the SU supporting the merger would not go forward. Okay, so I think that's what the question was. The second one is much more difficult to answer. I will read it. Was a no vote a vote against merger? Okay, was a no vote, a vote against the merger, November of 2017, considered a yes vote for an AGS plan? No. Okay, but the person continues, and it's a great question. If not, could you explain your decision to encourage the state board to consider an AGS? While I understand the reasons that went into developing the AGS, it's hard to say that it represents the opinion of the people of each of the towns. Agreed. That is to say, the AGS represents the opinion of a group of people, self-selecting, not people elected to represent their town. I don't disagree. I want to read a section of the letter that Senator White, if I may,
Sure.
I don't want to take up too much time, that we have been working on. And again, I will be very candid with you. This has been the most difficult issue for me as a legislator, because I am a former teacher, because my kids are in the public school, because I love Guilford School, and because I see every day the impact statewide of declining enrollment. This has been so incredibly emotional for me to figure out how to navigate this. In the last 6 months or so, I've been accused of being anti-public school, that I voted for Act 46 because I want to dismantle public school, that I am part of the nationwide cabal of, you name it. I've been accused of all that while sending my kids to public school, having taught in the school, and wanting to keep the school open. So I just want to say that. So I mention it because it is true what you say. Whoever asked the question, how can I say support the AGS? And I just want to be clear, this is what my letter will say I'm still wordsmithing because that's who I am, but I'm a writer. So since the Secretary of the Agency of Education released the statewide plan, we have been in active conversation with many members of our SU and many constituents. What these conversations demonstrate to us is that a forced governance merger may not achieve the extremely important aims and goals of the law, because the relationships among the various stakeholders must first be repaired and rebuilt. There's been so much anger and sadness and frustration that I have a hard time believing that we're going to move forward from this in a positive way. What I wrote was a mutually acceptable alternative governance structure could create a venue to begin to rebuild those relationships. That isn't necessarily the alternative governance structure that has been put forward by this group. So I appreciate the clarification. It is incredibly difficult to answer phone calls and emails, each saying the same thing, which is, if you don't do this, you're going to close our school. If you don't do that, you're going to close our school. And none of us know how this will shake out. But I do believe, personally, that being part of a bigger unit will save us in the end. But I hear my constituents who've turned out to vote saying something different. And I want to acknowledge that to the state board, because I am one person. I am just like you. I am one person, and in this role, I don't really have a special role as a senator. But I'm using my platform to say, please, think carefully about the fact that you've got towns that don't support this, and what is that going to do to our relationships moving forward in our schools if this is what we're building from. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Okay, we're coming up on 8:30. There's one more question I'll put out for anyone here that wants to answer it. And it's a hypothetical, but why can't the WSESU try the AGS for a few years to see if it works? And if it doesn't, then consider a merger later.
Well, the WSCSU can't just decide to do that. There will be some kind of a ruling from the Board of Ed. It's not something we can just decide to dabble in.
And maybe that's a good segue into where do we go from here. So I think we talked earlier that on September 19th, there's a meeting, a final hearing being held by the agency, Board of Ed, to hear from everybody one last time. And so that will happen, and then the Board of Ed will make their decision. At that point, we've all put our input in, and we wait to see what output comes out. And at that point, we're done.
There's something we might be useful to mention, which comes out of what Becca was just saying, and the question that was given to her, is that we not only have the popular vote of those 4 towns counterpoised against the Guilford School Board, we have a real spread, which is kind of crazy. Dummerston Board is 100% in favor of the AGS. Guilford 100% opposed. Vernon likes the AGS. Brattleboro, when they finally got to vote, voted 3-2 among the 5 of them to support the merger. Putney didn't vote, but there are members of the Putney Board on both sides of the question. So it's much murkier even than what we've been saying here tonight. And the State Board of Ed is, I would just think they'd want to leave the room. It's pretty confusing. There's from this 5-town unit, there is really nothing you can call consensus. It's just all over the place. It's pretty wild.
Sure.
To that question of what will happen next, Beth mentioned the public hearing, and Don mentioned other towns continuing to work on this alternative governance structure proposal, and our Guilford School Board will be meeting every first and third Monday at Guilford School, and in November we'll start to talk about our budget, and whatever the Board of Education decides, we'll be talking about how we'll pay for our middle schoolers at BAMS, and how we'll have a legal tax rate that the town can bear. And so there's on many levels, things will be moving forward, and I hope to see lots of people still involved.
Okay, on that note, let's wind it up. I will say that it's a tough issue, as we've all seen, and we've all felt, whether we have kids in the school now or used to have kids in the school or serve the town in whatever capacity. It's a profoundly important decision, for the town, from the State Board of Ed, whichever way it goes. But whatever happens, we need to keep working together, as Emily and Beth have said, as Don has said, because this is a great town, and we want to keep our school going and going strongly. So with that, we'll call it an evening. There are plenty of refreshments. Feel free to hang out and talk among yourselves.
Thank you.
If I didn't get your question, I'm sorry.
There's a lot of stuff